So we're going to look at how to graph sine and cosine when we change the amplitude in the period. We're going to have y equals a sine of bx. Now the a and the b are going to change the amplitude and the period respectively. So the a value is going to represent our amplitude, and the period, we're going to find that by doing 2 pi divided by that b value, because the b value is going to tell us the number of cycles that we see in 2 pi. Now the reason that the baseline is 2 pi is because if you can recall from one of our first videos, that here's the basic sine curve. It's always going to maintain that shape, and the period of the basic sine curve was 2 pi radians because of the distance around the unit circle. So everything that we do here for the period is going to be based off of 2 pi. Okay, so let's just quickly take a look at an example. Y equals -3 sine of 2x. So let's think about how that's going to change our sine curve. Now our amplitude is going to be 3, which means that from the midline, we're going to be going up 3 units and down 3 units. Okay? Now based on this, a sine of bx, our midline's not going to change from our original sine curve. Okay, so our midline is still going to be y equals 0. So I'm just going to write that down. Now, what do you think that negative sign is going to do? You're right, that negative sign is going to flip my sine curve. It's going to reflect over the x-axis. Okay? Now, that b value is 2. That means that I'm going to see 2 cycles in 2 pi. If I see 2 cycles in 2 pi, that means that my period is just 1 pi. That means that I'm going to see 1 cycle in just 1 pi. Okay, so now let's head over to our graph and let's plot everything. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to mark the midline. Okay, that's going to be just right here on the x-axis. Okay, now the amplitude is 3. So if you look at your original sine curve here, this amplitude up here is going to be 1, and that min's going to be -1. All right, so instead of going up to 1 and down to -1, I'm going to go up to 3 and down to -3. Okay, still going to have a 0 at 0. Because of my negative sign, I'm going to go down to 3 first, back up to the 0, all the way up to +3, and back down to the 0. Okay, and there's my sine curve. It's just upside down because of that negative sign. I think I'll draw one on the other side as well. And there's my curve there. Okay? Now, we need to label some tick marks on here because of our period being pi. So if my period's pi, that means that my last tick mark is going to be labeled pi. We've got the origin to be 0, and all the way to the left is going to be -pi. Now, there are 4 tick marks here. I'm going to label each one of those tick marks. Okay? It's very easy for me to cut things in half. I don't know about you, but I really like cutting things in half. So if I know that the 4th tick mark is pi, I know that the 2nd tick mark is going to be half of that. So what is half of pi? You're right, that's pi over 2. You could write 1/2 pi if you want to, but most people like to write pi over 2. Now, this first tick mark is going to be half of pi over 2. What's half of pi over 2? You're right, that's pi over 4. Now that 3rd tick mark, let's see, if I were to just count up to that 3rd tick mark, every tick mark now is worth pi over 4, right? All these tick marks are equally spaced. They're spaced pi over 4. So by the time I get to the 3rd one, that's 1, 2, 3 pi's over 4. Okay, everybody? Now, also on the left-hand side, same values, just everything's going to be negative. Okay? And there is our sine curve, y equals negative 3 sine of 2x. Okay? Great job, everybody. Let's try another one. So here, we're going to graph y equals 4 cosine of 1/3 x. All right? Same rules apply for my a and b value. So our amplitude is going to be 4. And our period, let's see, that 1/3 is going to tell me that I'm going to see 1/3 of a cycle in 2 pi. Now, if I'm going to see 1/3 of a cycle in 2 pi, then my period should be much bigger than 2 pi. Okay, so let's see, what is 2 pi divided by 1/3? Well, that's the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, so that's the same as 2 pi times 3. So my period in this case is going to be 6 pi. All right, let's recall from our last video what the cosine curve looks like, just this little bell here. Okay, so remember that the midline is still going to stay at y equals 0. So let me just draw that in. Okay, and you're going to go up to 4 and down to negative 4 to model your amplitude. Now the cosine curve starts right on the maximum, then we go to 0, down to the min, back to 0, up to the max. Okay, and there's my really stretched out cosine curve, and I can draw it on the other side also. All right, all the way down and back up. So then lastly, we just have to label our tick mark. So remember that our period we decided was 6 pi, so that's going to be our final tick mark, 6 pi. Origin's going to be 0. Remember, I love to cut things in half first, so I'm going to find the halfway mark to 6 pi. What's half of 6 pi? You're right, that's 3 pi. If I find the halfway mark to 3 pi, you're right, that's going to be 3 pi over 2. Half of 3 pi is 3/2 pi. Okay, remember that third tick mark is going to be 3 of the first one. I'm just going to count all the way up. So 3 pi's over 2, that's going to make 9 pi over 2. Okay, if I do 3 times 3 pi over 2, and I multiply just right across, that's going to give me 9 pi over 2. Okay, everybody, great job. Let's do some practice in class.